Hi everybody! In this video we're going to go over some basic 2D character animations, and we're going to add a idle, a run, and a jump animation. Now when we do animations we're really going to focus on three important things. They're going to be the animation themselves, the animator controller, which is going to handle all of the transitions, and then our code to actually trigger all of those transitions for our animator controller. So without any further ado, let's get to it.
For this video, I chose to use the free Warrior asset, which I found inside of Unity's asset store. If you choose to do a different asset, that's totally okay. The reason why I chose this one is, first of all, because it's free, but then next of all, it's because it has a great animation for idle, running, jumping, attack, death, ledge grabbing, wall climbing, and then some extra fun stuff which will come in handy later, like climbing. In order to add it, make sure you just download it and then add it to your Unity. I have done that already. And then next, we're going to add it inside of our file. Next, now that I'm in my game, to add that asset, all I need to do is go to Window, Package Manager. Yours will probably default into the Unity registry. Just change the packages into My Assets. And you might need to refresh. Mine's going to look very different from yours because of the fact that I have a whole lot of stuff already downloaded. But the one that I want to import or download is that Warrior animation set. So I'm going to click download. I don't have download anymore because I've already done it. And then I will click import. And I'm going to go ahead and import everything. An important little thing to note when you're importing things, be careful with this scene right here. If it were called sample scene and matched what I have, then if I import it, it's going to override it. So don't select anything that will override your current scenes. Since I already have this imported, I'm not going to import again. So I'm just going to click cancel. But what you're going to see after you do that import is inside of your assets, you'll have a new folder with that item inside of it. And inside of it, I can see I have a sprite sheet. I actually have a demo scene if I wanted to look at that. I have animations as well. Next, to add it into my game, the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to add a animator controller. And for good organization, I'm just going to go ahead and create a folder called animation. I'm going to open it up, and inside that folder, I'm going to create a new animator controller. I'm going to call this player animation. And I'm going to go ahead and open it up. And when I do, you should see an animator window open. The way the animator generally works inside the controller is from entry, it will go into a state. That state we usually start off with is idle. And I want idle to transition into different animations. And for right now, I'm just going to focus on idle, running, and jumping. So let me go ahead and add a new state. So I'm going to right click inside of my animator window, click create state empty, and I'm going to rename this idle. Now inside of the motion, I'm going to add the actual animation. Easy way to find it, I could drag and drop, but if I just click on this plus window, it will find all of my animations inside of my assets. And idle is the one that I want. And then I'm going to right click and add a new state, which I'm going to call run. And I'm going to go ahead and add the run animation, which I found right over here. And then to transition from idle to run, I need to actually make a transition, and I'm also going to make a parameter that triggers it. So let me start with the transition. I'm just going to right click on idle, click make transition, and I want to transition from idle to run. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing. When I stop running, I'm going to want to transition back into idle. So right click on run, make transition, back to idle. Perfect. I have one transition going this way, another going that way. If I click on the transition, you can see right here, this is what's going to happen. It's going to finish up the idle movement, and then it's going to slowly transition into run, which I might end up playing around with a little bit, but for right now, I'm just going to keep it how it is. And the next thing I really want is some sort of condition to trigger the transition. Otherwise, it will just happen as soon as this animation is over. So in order to create a trigger, I'm going to go over here into parameters. I'm going to click plus, and the first one for the run animation is going to be a float. I'm going to call it horizontal move. And my transition from idle to run, I want that to trigger when horizontal move is greater than a certain number. So let's just click plus to add a condition. The transition is going to be if the horizontal move is greater than, I could put it as 0, but I may get a little bit of static and glitchy effects. So I'm just going to make it something very small. How about 0.1? Should be fine. I might need to lower that or change that, but we're going to start at 0.1. And I want, if that's greater than, to run into idle, or I'm sorry, to go from idle to run. And then going back, I want my condition to happen if the value is, instead of greater than, less than 0.1. So if I stop running, then go into idle. Next, I want to add a jump animation. So that is going to be a brand new state. I'm going to right click, create state, empty. This one I'm going to call jump. And I want to be able to jump, or that transition to happen immediately. I really don't want it to be a transition. I want it to be immediate change, but I want it to change from idle to jump if I'm currently jumping, and same thing from run to jump if I'm currently running. So let me make a transition from both of those. And if I'm not jumping, I'm just going to make it transition into idle. My parameter in this case is going to be a Boolean. So I right click over here, or left click over here, click bool, and my new trigger is going to be is jumping. You can name it whatever you'd like, but is jumping makes a lot of sense. And if is jumping is true, I want it to transition into the jump animation for both idle and run. So let me go ahead and add that. And this is an important thing too. I currently have this has exit time on. And what that means is it's going to take, in this case, about 24 seconds for me to transition from one into, I'm sorry, quarter of a second, almost a quarter of a second. But it's going to take a little bit of time to transition into the jump, which I don't want. I want it to jump immediately. So I'm just going to turn off has exit time for all of these jump animations. Same thing with the land. I'm just going to turn off has exit time. Oh, and I want to add a condition. If is jumping is false, go into idle. Oh, and then of course I need to add the jump animation. So let me go ahead and do that. Perfect. Okay, so now run can go to jump and jump can go down to idle. Perfect. Okay, that is about everything that I need right now for my animator controller. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this controller to my player. And in order to do that, I'm going to jump into the scene. The next thing I want to do is attach that animator controller to my scene. So right now I have my player, and these images are just kind of a placeholder until I had a sprite ready. And a real important thing in general, when you want to add a visual, you don't want to put it directly on the same empty as the player. You want to make it separate. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty on the player, so that becomes a child of it. And I'm going to call this player visual. I'm also going to turn off the sprite renderer for the player. So I have no image there anymore. And inside the player visual, I'm going to go ahead and add a sprite renderer. And for the sprite I add, it's going to be the warrior. You can see when you pull it in, it's going to be quite small. So how about I go ahead and resize it. And I'm going to reposition it. right about there. And if I click on the player, you can see right now the box collider is not quite right. So I'm just going to make that a little bit larger. I can do that over here. I can adjust the scale to be similar to my sprite. It's just a little bit too big. There we go. Not perfect, but pretty good. And I still have my box cast at a decent size as well. So everything should work. I actually have not added the animation yet, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to add the animator controller onto player visual. So click on player visual, click add component, and you're going to find an animator. That's going to be the file that houses the animator controller, not an animation, but an animator. Under controller, you can just drag this in, or you can click the bus button and find what you've created, but either one will work. And right now, if I play the game, what's going to happen is it's going to, as soon as it starts, jump straight into the idle animation. And since I don't have any code triggering these events or making these conditions available, it's just going to stay in idle the entire time. But if you're able to press play and you see your character idling, it will again stay idle even if I jump or run. But if you have that component, then you are off to a very good start. There's also another little thing that I noticed. I don't know if you noticed, but when I jump, sometimes I end up going to the floor just a tiny bit. To fix and prevent that from happening, all I have to do is click on the player, and then under rigid body, collision detection is currently discrete. If I change it to continuous, then that will prevent me from ever kind of going into an object. Next, I'm going to jump into my code, which is right here under player move. And I'm going to make some connections to my animator, and I'm going to set those parameters to trigger so that I can switch animations. My next step is going to be adding a reference to my animator controller, and I want to change the parameter so this will trigger any sort of change in events. First thing I want to do is I do need to reference that animator. So I'm going to call it, I just like to call it animator. It's an easy way of organizing. Make sure like your class name is capitalized and your variables are always lowercase or camel cased. And the first thing I want to do is I want to connect to that animator. In order to do that quickly and easily without any sort of error, I'm going to write animator equals get component. Now, since it's a component in a child object and not in the regular object, I want to write get component in children. And then my generic brackets, which is the lowercase, and animator, which is uppercase. And this will connect to the animator inside of the player visual, which is child object. Perfect. And then next, in order to actually trigger this animation, what I want to do is I just need to write animator dot set float, because horizontal movements, the parameter that I want for it was a float. And if it's greater than a certain value, then go into my run animation. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and write set float. And then in parentheses, I first need the ID. I'm going to call that by its name, which is horizontal move. Easy way to make sure I don't screw this up and misspell it is I'm going to Control C to copy it and then Control V to paste it. I apologize right now for creating my trigger or parameter and making it the exact same name as my variable. I didn't think about that when I was setting everything up. However, this will totally work. Just know that like inside of quotes, this is my trigger name, and this right here is the horizontal move variable. And final thing, if I'm going left, my horizontal move is going to be a negative value, which is not going to properly trigger the way that I want to, because I only did it if the value were greater than 0.1. So to make that work, I'm going to, instead of just do horizontal move, I'm going to do the absolute value of horizontal move. And to add that, I'm going to call on the math float class, so math f dot abs for absolute value, and inside of parentheses is going to be horizontal move. So that way it's always going to be a positive value, and it will work whether I'm moving left or whether I'm moving right. This is actually all I need in order to make my movement work. I'm going to add jump next, but for right now, I really want to test and see if that left and right movement's going to work. So let me go ahead and press play. And what we should see is we should see me starting out in the idle animation, which is good. And if I go left, it goes into a run, which is good. And one little, I'm going to say, kind of glitch is the fact that when I move, it waits for the animation to be done before going into the next animation. So to fix that, I'm just going to do this. For both of these transitions, I'm just going to turn off has exit time. If I'd like, I could make it a lot shorter. I could play with this as much as I want, but for simplicity's sake, I'm going to turn off has exit time. So now when I play it, as soon as I start moving, I'm going to go right into a run animation. As soon as I stop running, I'm going to stop. And you can see everything seems to transition much, much better. Perfect. All right. Next, let's go ahead and add that jump animation. Now, as a final step for this video, I'm going to make that transition into the jump, and I'm going to make this as easy as I possibly can. In order to make this work, what I'm going to do is I'm going to check when I'm grounded. If I am grounded, then I'm going to make is jumping false. If I'm not grounded, I will make it true. So inside of my ground check, here's my box cast. So if that returns true, that means I'm on the ground. And I'm going to write animator.set bool because my trigger for the jumping was a boolean. And I named it is jumping to make sure I don't have any sort of spelling errors. It'd be best just copy and paste it directly from my inspector. So is jumping is going to be false if I'm on the ground. And then it will be the opposite if I am not grounded. So I'm just going to copy and paste this. Do make sure that you put it above the return. For anybody that's new to coding, you may not know that what return does is it goes back into where it was called. So if I put it after the return, it would never actually be reachable. So if I am not on the ground, set is jumping to true. And I'll turn on the jump while not grounded. That is all I need. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and see how it looks. I do already know that this code is going to work. However, I'm not quite sure how it's going to look from my animation standpoint. So I'm just going to go ahead and play test it and make any changes if I need to. So right now I'm in idle, which is good. When I move left and right, I'm in run, which is good. And when I click jump, I go into that jump. And that jump looks a little bit odd to me, partially due to the fact that it looks like the sprite is looking up. She's also in a position as if she were going up instead of falling. So to make this easier, I could do a few different things, but to go as simple as possible, instead of jump, I'm going to change that to fall. And I believe that this is going to look just a little bit better. Typically what I would do is I would set my velocity and check like if I'm going up, make it jumping, and if I'm going down, make it a fall. But I think that that animation looks a lot better and more appropriate for what I have. All right, guys, that is everything for this video. I hope you found it easy, enjoyable, and I hope you're able to add a whole lot of extra animations. For fun, I would go ahead and add things like an attack animation. I'll add a death animation later, but the rest is up to you. World is your oyster. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have an awesome rest of your day.